Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Northernlands session on collaborating around data. My name is Leigh Dodds. I'm the Director of Delivery at the Open Data Institute. I'm going to introduce the session, put a bit of context to the discussion, and then we'll hear from two speakers, Sam Milson from Open Data Manchester and Lindsay Marchesson from the Open Contracting Partnership. So the question that we're considering in this session is, why is collaboration around data important in 2020 and beyond? Well, we're living in interesting times. We're dealing with a global pandemic, whilst being faced often daily with the issues and problems of unethical collection and use of data, all set against a backdrop of a rapidly changing climate. So we have some big challenges to face in our societies, in our economies, and in the environment. Data can help us to address those challenges, but only if we are open and transparent in how that data is being collected and used. And only if that data is fairly representing the communities that will be benefiting from it or be potentially impacted through its use. And we need to ensure that data is being used in responsible and ethical ways. And to do that, we need to collaborate. We need to work together to try and maximize the value that we can create by using data whilst minimizing its potential harmful impacts. And it's only through that that we will create a world where data works for everyone. So in this session, we're going to look at collaboration around data in two ways. Firstly, around collaborating on its collection and use, so collection and maintenance, and secondly, around its publication and use. So let's jump into the first of those, collaborative maintenance. Now, when we're typically introducing open data, we focus on the definition that open data is data that anyone can access, use, and share. And while that is true and useful, it doesn't get into the practice of open data, which even in 2020 is still largely around public and private sector organizations publishing data that they have already collected. So increasing access to it to allow others to use the data in new ways. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can work together to collect and maintain data. And there are many projects that exist that have explored that approach. So I think it's important to recognize that, that collaborative maintenance is an option, that communities can work together to collect and maintain data, which is then made available under an open license. When we look at the kinds of work that is involved in maintenance, it turns out that we can share quite a lot of it. We can decide on what data should be collected in the first place and how it should be stored and managed. We can share the work of collecting and maintaining the data so it maintains its use and value over time. We can work together on managing access to data and improving its quality. And we can collaborate on building the tools and the communities that can help us to unlock value from that data set once it's been collected. So there's a range of different activities we can be involved with. So let's look at a few brief examples. So the first, perhaps most widely known, is OpenStreetMap, which is a very successful collaborative maintenance project. Within OpenStreetMap, one particular initiative is the humanitarian OpenStreetMap project, which brings together local mappers working on the ground with remote mappers working with satellite imagery to help to improve responses to disasters around the world. By working together, those mappers can rapidly update and improve the map in areas where humanitarian aid is needed to ensure that aid is directed in the most useful and most impactful ways. Another example would be the Mozilla Common Voice project, which is a project to try and develop a more diverse and representative data set that can support the development of voice recognition applications. So the project encourages people to contribute their voice to the data set and get involved in transcribing recordings that have been contributed to it. The third example we can look at is the work of Open Data Manchester in Stockport. So let's hear from Sam Milson about that project.
Hi, I'm Sam. I work for Open Data Manchester. We're a not-for-profit formed from a diverse group of open data advocates back in 2010, and we support organizations to release data, and we help people to use it. We build and support good data practice through expert advice, advocacy, events, research, that sort of thing. So back in 2019, part of the ODI's OpenGIS call, we ran a project which we called Mapping Mobility Stockport, which was a program about trying to map the experience of people with mobility and accessibility impairments, looking at the routes and the strategies that they used to travel in and around Stockport town centre. Quite often, these sort of communities can be overlooked in town planning, and whether that's because the urban environment deteriorates over time or just doesn't account for their experience. So it could be things like not having dropped curbs at the pavement at busy crossings, for example. These things historically can be overlooked. And again, moving forward in terms of planning and redeveloping the town centre, quite often, again, these things are quite hard to sort of map and to take into account, often because the GIS systems themselves they have a very sort of basic way of describing these things like dropped curbs or tactile paving, but they don't take into account the vast range of experiences that people have. So they don't take into, often they might not take into account, quite acute neurological conditions, for example. So how do you sort of plan for that? So with Mapping Mobility Stockport, we had some funding from the ODI in which we sort of developed a methodology for capturing and mapping this data. So we worked with Stockport Town Centre and some community groups in Stockport, so Disability Stockport and also Age UK Stockport. And we ran some workshops with them where we got maps of the town centre from the council, and we literally just started scribbling on the maps the routes that people took to get where they needed to go around the town centre, and started to identify problem areas, but we also started to identify the routes that people took regularly, because quite often people do have their own routes and strategies to move around the town centre, but these kind of remain tacitly within those communities. So it was a really good exercise for us and for Stockport Council to be able to actually map these routes and to think about, why do people take these routes? Why not this particular route when it's more direct? Maybe because there's, it's too steep for a wheelchair to pass down safely, that kind of thing. So it was a really, really good exercise for Stockport Council, because they were redeveloping doing a lot of redevelopment of the town centre. The bus stop they are currently redeveloping. So a lot of the experiences of the bus station area, some of the information that we captured has fed directly into the redevelopment of the bus station, so making it more accessible. With the workshops themselves, we started off doing workshops where we just scribbled down problem areas, but then we also went out onto the streets and conducted walkabouts, one-on-one walkabouts with people, so wheelchair users, people with visual impairments, elderly, and literally just walked around and with a dictaphone and taken photos, and we just took the routes that they took and got them to describe their experience. And in the end, we were able to build a sort of actual digital map of these routes and of the good areas and of the problem areas. And as I say, the project was really, really successful. Stockport Town Centre, have used the data that we captured and mapped in the redevelopment of their bus station. But actually moving forward, at Open Data Manchester, we've been thinking about how can we capture these experiences, because there are so many more experiences. And I think that a lot of GIS systems don't have the, let's say, the language or the structures through which we can describe these experiences. Quite often you're looking at urban areas from the point of view of the buildings or from the streets, rather than the experience of the human being, the embodied experience of the human in that space. So from the Mapping Mobility project, what we're hoping to do is we're actually going to take the data that we collected with these groups and start to build a framework, a sort of really basic, I suppose, trying to look at, can we create a sort of basic standard for describing experience, so describing and mapping areas from the human being, the human's perspective, and from that can also incorporate a multitude of different experiences. So we're actually hoping this year to start developing that project further, so taking the data and the stuff that we collected and developing a kind of prototype, whether that's going to be a questionnaire or some kind of standard. We're going to sort of hopefully work on that and develop it further, and to see whether we can, create a kind of a standard or a framework for capturing capturing more people's experience of moving around urban areas, which we think could make town centres, city centres much more inclusive and just a lot safer and easier for all people to move and travel around and live in.
So thanks, Sam. What's really interesting to me about that project is not only were they able to create some local impact by working with the local community on collecting missing data, it's also led to some reflections about better ways to collect data in future, so that it's more representative of those communities. And that's something that we're really interested in at the ODI. We recently published a guidebook to help people design and build systems and tools that will support collaborative maintenance. We'd really love to get some feedback on this, so please take a look and let us know what you think. So let's move now on to the second way in which we can think about collaboration. So collaborating on the publication and use of data. And again, I think it's illustrative to look at what is happening in the open source movement and think about how we might apply that to open data initiatives. So some of the more successful open source projects have recognized that in order to be impactful, they need to get people to contribute more than just code and bug fixes. They need a wider range of skill sets. They need people to help produce documentation. They need user researchers to make sure that the software is well designed. They need designers to help improve the user interfaces and the user experience of using those tools. So there's been a move to try and get more people involved in a whole variety of different ways. I recently came across this framework called BaseDef that had been developed by a number of people in the open source community. It tries to spell out a variety of ways in which we might contribute to an open source project and in helping it achieve some impact. So we might blog about it to help other people understand how it could be used. We might try it in a project so that we can provide useful feedback about how it might be used. We can file bugs, we can contribute bug fixes, but we could also just work to try and improve the documentation to help other people, perhaps with less technical skills, to get some value from the software. Now, what if we applied the same framework to open data? We could write about new data sets as they're published to help others to understand both the value of the data, perhaps also its limitations. We could write tutorials and produce code that can illustrate how a data set can be used. to show how it could be used in specific tools or to answer specific types of questions. We can give feedback to the publisher, maybe to suggest how they could improve how the data is been published, perhaps to align it better with other data sets or to adopt a specific set of standards. And through the freedoms that are given to us by open licenses, we can enrich and improve those data sets, perhaps to add in additional data or to link it with other sources. And increasingly, we need to make sure that data is well documented. So we can all contribute to that. We can help to fill in the gaps and support publishers in making sure that their data is well described and well published. Increasingly, there's a range of open data initiatives that are realizing that this kind of broader support is necessary in order to achieve impact. One example of those is the Open Contracting Partnership. So let's hear from Lindsay about the work that they've been doing.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Marchessault, and I'm the Director of Data and Engagement at the Open Contracting Partnership, where we support governments and other stakeholders around the world to improve their public services by improving their public contracting. Public spending on contracts adds up to more than $10 trillion of public investment per year, so it's very important to get it right. And by that, I mean value for money for government, fair access to opportunity for business, and high quality goods, works, and services for everyone, which includes everything from buying textbooks to maintaining power plants. Unfortunately, in many cases, we don't have the data that we need to ensure an effective procurement process or to diagnose the performance of the system as a whole. These data challenges might be because the data is not collected, not digitized, or because of poor data quality. And usually there's an element of collaboration in this. I'll give an example. Currently, in the COVID-19 emergency response, many governments are currently purchasing or have purchased ventilators. And the process to effectively buy ventilators involves a lot of needed data as input. This includes understanding what is our current stock and supply of ventilators, where are the ventilators functioning, are they the appropriate ventilators that we need, what do we expect in terms of the amount of ventilators that we need and when we're going to need them and where we're going to need them, what are our best predictions and our best advice. Finally, what do we know about the market for ventilators and where are they available, what are our market reference prices, and who might be able to supply these things. Without the process to understand and collect this data, digitize it, and use it effectively, the quality of the procurement outcomes will be affected. And that's just one example of how data is important in all different types of public purchases at all different stages, whether that's the planning of the procurement process itself, or how we want to effectively manage that contract delivers value for what was needed and intended. So this situation is why we support partners to collect, publish, improve, and use open data about the planning, procurement, and implementation of public contracts. And to do this, we maintain a variety of tools and guidance, most notably the Open Contracting Data Standard. And we provide both policy and technical advice, including on change management strategies. And we also provide a free global help desk for the Open Contracting Data Standard in both Spanish and English. Over the years, we've supported hundreds of partners from dozens of countries, and we are working to build an international community of open contracting practitioners. And one thing that we've learned is how important multi-stakeholder collaboration is to achieving measurable results. Collaboration has been even more important in 2020 as the entire open contracting community has focused on ensuring the effectiveness and accountability of the COVID-19 response procurement. So this is to ensure we have the necessary medical equipment, facilities, and services to address the crisis. And I'll share one example. The government of Paraguay, through their procurement agency, wanted to ensure transparency of the COVID-19 emergency purchases. Because of the emergency, government agencies were allowed to buy quickly without competition, without an advertised process. But just because something has to be done quickly doesn't mean that it can't happen with accountability. And so our help desk advised them on how they could use the Open Contracting Data Standard to identify the COVID-19 related procurement and ensure that it was referenced to the COVID-19 emergency budget lines as well. Our engagement leads for Latin America also worked closely with the government and users of the data to ensure that the data was being presented to people in a way that they could use it. And one way that this happened was by a tool developed by the Inter-American Development Bank that we advised and supported on, which reused the data and combined it with other information, including budget, geographical data, in something called an investment map. And the data included information on the buyers, the prices, the suppliers, and information about the items and services being purchased and their delivery. And this data is being used by a wide range of stakeholders within the country, including the government to improve their own processes, by business to understand the market and the opportunities, by civil society, academia, and media. In fact, journalists have reported about several irregular procurements in the media, including a case in which large volumes of tonic water were purchased at roughly 5 times the market price as a COVID-19 emergency procurement. And as a result of this case coming to light, the government issued a new requirement that buyers must report and publish their market reference prices to justify the prices they're paying, which will hopefully avoid other inflated emergency procurement. So at the Open Contracting Partnership, we're also supporting similar efforts to publish and use procurement data all around the world, some specific to the COVID-19 response, but also starting to prepare for the coming spending associated with the economic recovery. And for example, we recently launched an action research program where we're supporting researchers from 12 countries to use data and investigate the effectiveness and integrity of the COVID-19 emergency response procurement. And we hope that their findings will lead to similarly actionable policy recommendations, which can be implemented through collaboration with government. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions about our work, our tools, or our support.
So thanks, Lindsay. Again, I think that there's something really powerful there about demonstrating how by bridging between the publishers and the users of the data, the partnership has been able to increase the impact, increase the value that has been gained by sharing that data in the first place. So to return to our original question, why is collaboration around data important in 2020 and beyond? It's because we need to work together to get more people involved in understanding how data is being collected, get more people involved in maintaining that data over the long term so that we have a stronger data infrastructure. And we need to work together as communities to make sure that we can maximize the value of that data while minimizing its potential harmful impacts. And through that work, we can create an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. So thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the work of our speakers or the work that we have done at the ODI, then please follow the links in the slides. Thank you very much.